I've done almost no model making for a few years now, and oh, how I miss it. I love making stuff, and I love making stuff with my hands. Now, you may say that you must get some pleasure, surely, from crafting a good video, and I do. There is a satisfaction in editing a good video and thinking, hey, I put that one together pretty well, but it's all just a lot of insubstantial pixels that manifest on a screen, whereas if I've got something in my hands and I'm cutting and gluing and shaping and moulding and I end up with a thing which I can pick up and turn in my hand, it's a physical thing, there is a definite extra pleasure I get from that, and I'm sure I'm very far from unique in this. And I've been yearning to get my hands on some stuff, and even though I didn't have any time to do any modelling, I've been looking at videos online of other people making models and occasionally buying some of the stuff that they're using, thinking, right, when I get going again, I'll give that a go. And I've taken the plunge. I've bought a hot wire cutter. It's sort of cutting styrofoam, and I hope to make loads of scenery. And I've been making some already. Look, some staircases and a small room for a dungeon or something. So at the moment I'm making sort of medievally castle-y bits and bobs, but I shall be making adobe buildings very soon and other stuff, Roman stuff, an aqueduct. I'm going to make a Roman aqueduct. That's definitely on the list. Now, I've been watching a number of other channels. Some of them, like Wylock's Armory and the DM's Craft, they tend to specialise in making things out of cardboard, which I have to admit is not tremendously appealing to me. I don't want to make things out of cardboard, I just don't. But there are others like Max DM Crafting, chap from Spain, and perhaps chief amongst the advocates of the hot wire cutter and its effect on styrofoam is a chap called Black Magic Craft. Not chap, a channel called Black Magic Craft. I've been watching a lot of his stuff. Because he has recommended shifting sands extra twiddly stuff, I've got some shifting sands extra twiddly stuff. What is this? Well, these are laser cut MDF kits, the add-ons, extra tools to use with a hot wire cutter, and he's thrown in this, I notice, and oh, I do love the smell of laser cut MDF in the morning, I have to say. Anyway, and what is this? Well, you could say, well, it's obvious what it is. It's a template for cutting Gothic arches, not Norman arches. These are not Norman arches. These are Gothic arches. Get your architecture right. Norman arches and Romanesque arches and Saxon arches are semicircular, and these, as you see, come to a definite point. But what is this? Is this a useful free template that he's given me, or a piece of waste? It could be that he wanted the arches cut out so that he could sell those to people, because they do actually sell Norman arches, and that this is just the waste product, what's left over, which he thought he would throw in for free, which is fine, I'm not complaining. Free is my favourite price. But the trouble is that I really would quite like the bits that have been cut out here, because then I could put them on my hot wire cutter and cut round them, and then I'd get, I nearly said Norman arch, Gothic arch shaped holes, whereas I can't get the wire, as you'll see, of my hot wire cutter into these. But I suppose I could just saw the bottom off it and make use of it that way. So I got here the Guider Pro and the angle cutter, but are they any use? Because I've already started cutting angles and cutting large flat sheets of stuff without either of these tools, and seem to have got on all right. So it could be that these are expensive luxuries that you need not buy. But at least I can justify the cost by saying that I can make a video about how they are perhaps expensive luxuries that you don't need. Anyway, so I'm going to give them a go. Right, this is the thing itself, the hot wire cutter. The wire itself is there, and it gets hot if I switch this switch and it comes on. It makes a slight humming noise and the red light comes on, which is very reassuring. This knob here is just to grab the end of the wire, and that's the temperature control. This particular one is by a company called Proxon, but I am not here to act as an advert for this particular brand. Others exist, which may be better for all I know, but this is the only one I have, and I have no basis for comparison whatsoever. I do have a few criticisms, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. One thing that displeased me a bit is that there are gradations marked on it in French, which isn't very useful if you're into making stuff for Dungeons and Dragons and the like, which uses a 1-inch scale. And what's more, it doesn't even have the tenths, the millimetres as they're known, in between, which you would have thought would have been a basic requirement. So even before I used it for the very first time, I added my own measurements to the edge there in British. Another annoyance was this knob here, which was labelled with tiny little numbers written in black against a black background, which are next to impossible to read under even quite good lighting conditions, and a tiny near invisible notch at the top. So instead I got my marker pen, I wrote 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 around the edge and painted on a white line so I can actually see where I'm flipping an with this knob. Much better. The material I'm working with is this stuff, XPS, extruded polystyrene foam. It's fairly substantial stuff. It goes by a quite frustratingly large number of different names, but it's sold to builders as insulation material, and you should be able to find it online. In fact, there's a link in the description, I believe, to one firm that I found that sells it in this colour, which is what they describe as, I think, charcoal, which I find a bit more useful colour for making models out of. Usually it comes in pink or blue, or as here you can see it's a sort of a, what's that, peach colour. It's quite tough. And it's not this stuff. Now this stuff you'll be familiar with from the packaging material, and you can see it has a bead-like structure. This is expanded, it's puffed up polystyrene foam, and one way of illustrating the difference is if I drop some of this, it makes this noise, whereas if I drop some of this, it makes this noise. You see, this is much lighter and softer than this, and if I break this up, it breaks up into lots of little annoying beads, and that's not what we want, whereas this cuts cleanly. And I was delighted by how quickly I could turn out stuff like this. I made this in just a few minutes on the first day I got the cutter going. These take a little bit of setting up, but it's not too tricky. And there is a problem though, which is that this material is very light. And to illustrate this, I have two staircases here, one of which I have glued a nut into the underside of, and the other one I have not. And you'll see that if I were to, for instance, tip my hand, the one which isn't you see that falls over very, very quickly, whereas the other one can go to a crazy angle before eventually it falls over. And there's also the blow test. You'll notice that I'm going to place the lighter one further from me, but even so, yeah. If you blow, the light stuff just blows around. I'd imagine that could be quite annoying on, say, a wargaming table if you place down your scenery and someone just, sighs with exasperation after a particularly unlucky die roll or something, and then demolishes half the castle. One thing I've been working on is this. It's some sort of, it's a room. I don't know. Is it subterranean? It doesn't have to be. It's a room of some sort. And you see it's got fancy arches along the back wall there, a textured floor, and a fancy entrance at either end. And I'm going to be adding some more pillars and twiddly stuff to it. So it's not finished, but maybe you are interested in how did I get these amazing arches? It was actually very, very simple. What I did is I drew them out on a piece of card. You see this piece of card is from a packet which has a hard, shiny coating on it, which I think makes it slightly more suitable for this. And I drew on this side, cut it out with a pair of ordinary scissors, though you could always use a scalpel or X-Acto knife, which I believe is just a brand name of craft knifey thing. And then you got this. And so then what you do is you pin it. You pin it to the foam that you intend to cut, and then you cut it with a hot wire foam cutter. So let's see, let's fire her up and see how this works. I go like that, and 'tis done. It's as easy as that, but just in case you weren't watching, I'm going to do it again. Whoops. And the wire's a bit slack. Well, it works. Pull these beige pins out. Beige! And you'll see that it's pretty accurate on this side. Not quite as accurate on that side. That's where I went slightly wrong, but never mind, I can just glue that back. Now there are of course pinholes, but since I'm going to be texturing this with a stone texture, I can easily hide the pinholes in the texture. So I'm not worried about that at all. So there you go, double arch, marvellous. Right, this is another new toy I've got. This one's referred to as an engraving tool. It gets hot at the end, and the idea is that I'm going to put some holes in this. Now I tried earlier to put some holes in this using drill bits. That didn't come to a happy conclusion. So I'm now going to try with this engraving tool, and the principal challenge here is to do it whilst also keeping everything in frame so that you can see what's going on. Well, that seemed to work reasonably well. Yes, I'm happy with that. Can I do it twice more? Okay, not brilliantly round, but better definitely than I achieved with the drill bit. I'm going to be content with that, and see if I can do it thrice more. Here's another new toy for me. This one is a hot wire cutter, but it's a handheld one. I got this pretty cheaply on eBay, and I'm going to try it for a new task. Now I'm going to use my technique of pinning bits of card to both sides of a piece of foam, in the idea being that I end up with a piece of foam that has the profile of the card. The card is identical both sides, and I've been very careful to pin it exactly opposite. Well, let's see if the handheld cutter finds this any easier than the big cutter. A staircase. I think that was easier. The difference wasn't enormous, but I think it was noticeable, easier. Just trim the top there. There you go, a staircase. That was pretty quick. And look at the interesting bit of waste cut off I've got. Some sort of freestanding staircase. I should be able to do something with that, don't you think? Here you see me using the Shifting Sands Guider Pro 2. A large, vertical, very precisely perpendicular wall that's flat and excellent for making large parallel cuts in big things. But that's about it. I've used the angle cutter all of about once or twice. So yes, these tools are useful but very, very far from essential. And here you see me making the same sort of cut with the guider bar that comes with the cutter. And okay, it's not quite as precise, quite as easy, but it's fine. So, having experimented with the black foam and found it fine, I decided to order in bulk. There was a minimum amount I had to order in order to get free postage, and this was it. It really is quite a lot. So there are 8 sheets here, each quite large, just short of an inch thick. They're 25 milometers. That's 2.5 centimeters in metric. So just a little bit short of an inch, but should be fine, I think. And right, on with the project. Frantically, I drew plans that bore almost no resemblance to what I then later went on to make. Why was I doing this? Deadlines, they can be good, well, sometimes at least, and sometimes they work on me. And I've got one coming up very soon. Yes, just the day after tomorrow is the deadline for a modelling competition being run by Black Magic Craft, another YouTube channel, and I thought I would use this as an opportunity to spur myself on, to get something done. So the theme is foam in terms of material, so I have to make it out of some sort of foam. This sort of foam is fine. Pretty much any sort of foam is allowed apart from that stuff that we Brits call oasis, you know, the floristry stuff for keeping plants watered, but which apparently is quite dangerous to work with. If you start carving it when it's dry, you get dust on it, so don't. The theme of what you're supposed to make out of this foam is a sort of a hazard. I think a particular one that would be in the context of a dungeon. So a dungeon hazard made out of foam, and immediately I have an idea. I had an idea quite some while ago. The trouble is that this last week I've had flu, so I've just spent a week sweating in bed and feeling rather sorry for myself, and not making models. So now the deadline is really, really close. So possibly my original idea is now a little bit ambitious, but well, we'll see. After the first session, this is how far I've got. I'm just about to break for something to eat. So you can see you've got the chasm here, which this is where the pillars will come out. And now here is the very first thing that I actually made and painted up using these new techniques, using this new working material, this XPS foam. I've got a chasm, because we all love chasms, and that drops away into, well, some sort of liquid that I've just painted black. Whenever I've been underground and have seen reasonably still water, it's always looked black to me, so black I have painted it. And at either end there's a grating, and the grating itself is made out of that stuff that they sell for putting under pizzas in the oven, or oven chips and so forth. So that's what that is. The paint job is using the Black Magic Craft recipe for a wash, which, to be honest, I'm not brilliantly impressed with. I don't know if I'm going to be using that much more, but I'll try anything once, and I was in a tremendous hurry. The bridge, which is removable, it was originally going to start here and then go across to there, but that made it far too high, so what I did is I just chopped the ends off, and that gives me a bridge that is set down into the chasm. which is a perfectly strong way of making a bridge, and it means it's not too high. Because why would you not want it too high? Well, at this end, I've got a load of arrow slits. You see, I've got 4 there, and I've got one and another one there either side of this door. The door is a separate piece, and the door has a hole in it, and that goes here, in there. There we go, like that. And I will have to, at some point in the future, make floors for archers to stand on to shoot through all these various arrow slits, because, well, it's not really a usable piece of terrain, assuming that you do actually manage to battle past this. I called it the reception room, by the way. You can imagine this is not the nicest way to be received. Now, of course, if you have a chasm to go down into, that means you've got to build the floor up. In case you're curious as to what it looks like underneath, that's what it looks like underneath. Which means that this entranceway is very high. And at the moment, I have no way of getting to it. So we need to build more stuff. Now, my feeling is that they would probably want no one to be able to bring up anything useful for getting across this bridge or creating an alternative to the bridge. So no very long spans of wood that could span across that chasm. So some sort of winding corridor here, which would make it impossible to bring up anything really big. Anyway, so there's more to come in the future here. Now then, what is this piece of rope attached to a little wooden wedge? I imagine some of you are crying. Well, that's because I haven't shown you the whole thing, because as another separate bit over the top comes this thing, which drops down like that. Now I tried several other designs. Pillars coming up either side of the bridge. Anyway, this is what eventually I settled on. So you've got to imagine that this is part of the ceiling. So the ceiling's been cut away here and here, but we can see this central bit of the ceiling. And I can imagine an excuse actually in a game for adding this during the game, because they might see the bridge, having come through this door, look across, see the bridge, see the opposite door, see all the arrow slits, and perhaps not look up and not notice that there is in fact a great big swinging log here. You see, it's got a pulley thing here which does actually go round, and that comes up to there. And now I'm going to have to put this down because I need another hand to set it. So this is the wedge which goes underneath there like that, and this end of this rope goes through the door, and I can't really see what I'm doing. Oh, I've got it through. There we go, through the door like that. So the enemy sees you coming, and you've got this very narrow bit of bridge here to cross in the middle. And how do you do that? Well, if you all charge, then it's going to be very embarrassing, because you'll get perhaps 3 or 4 abreast on this side of the bridge, but then you suddenly have to everyone no, after you. No, this awkward bit. It's clearly only 1 man wide in the middle, so there's got congestion there. And don't forget, all the time you're being shot from not just the front but the 2 sides as well. And then when they decide that the time is right, they can pull this wedge like that, and that releases the log. Now the real log, unfortunately, is made out of just a very light piece of wood, and so the tiny bit of friction is enough to stop it swinging. But you imagine the real thing would, under its weight, because that tree trunk would weigh a few tons, would swing down and smash you like that. Biff. Yeah, swack. Like that. And so that would discourage further attempts to get across. And because it's got this rope attached to the end of it, the people who are this side of the door can actually pull it back up and then let it go again. So they can have a second try. Admittedly, the first one, when it's triggered by the wedge being pulled out, will be the best swing. But after that, they can still have some pretty good swings, as long as they've got enough people here to pull and hold the weight of the thing. But there it is on a pulley, and don't forget there could be a winch or pulley, or even some mules or something pulling on this end to help them. So there you go. That's actually a practical, would actually work in real life, reusable, reloadable during a combat trap. I suppose you could call that a trap. And you've got conventional, tried and tested. Yes, arrow slits in the real world do actually work. They really are a thing. And why do we not have more arrow slits in dungeons? Because it's a pretty obvious way of defending one. And you've got the defensive chasm. So there we go. Hours of fun. And I didn't win. I went into the competition. I didn't even make the the shortlist. I wasn't for one moment expecting that I would win, but I had some hope of at least making the shortlist, but I didn't. Anyway, so there you go. It's my first attempt, and I hope get better. Sponsor time! Yes! If you have watched this far, then it's quite likely that you're a war gamer or a roleplay gamer and or a model maker, or possibly you're one of my many viewers who are working on novels. I get quite a steady trickle of emails from people who are working on novels or have some question about world building that they want to put to me. And I don't know, maybe occasionally I help a little bit. Anyway, so if you're that sort of person, then maybe my sponsor will be of great interest to you. My sponsor being World Anvil. Yes, now World Anvil, got to be consistent, is a browser-based platform. So there you go, it's online and it's there for you to organize that vast mountain of data that you, as the responsible and conscientious world builder, have amassed. What do you do with all this data, all the families and all the people in them, and all the timelines of all the battles and the histories and things that happened in the past, and all the borders that have moved this way and the other, and all the maps? You've got so much data. Wouldn't it be great to do what mere pen and paper cannot do, and cross-reference everything and have maybe interactive maps, and then showcase it not just to your immediate friends, but to the world? Wouldn't that be good? Well, with World Anvil, you can. And if you go to www.worldanvil.com, you don't have to type in, because that's silly. Okay, I should have missed out the possibly. Okay, so I'll be silent this time. www.worldanvil.com. Then you will find that you can make use of, not all the features, but for most of the major features for free. Yes, for free. You can try it out. And then if later you feel that this is definitely for you, you can pay extra for what they call guild membership. And with guild membership, you get certain extra things, including, perhaps most importantly, privacy, because maybe you want to keep your world secret. You don't want other people to see it. Maybe if your players read ahead, it'll spoil the game for you, or something like that. Or maybe you think that you've got such a bit of hot property, oh yes, that the rest of the world will be queuing up at your door to buy it from you, so that they can, having given you some financial recompense, enjoy your world as well. So if you think you've got a saleable world, then yes, maybe that's another reason you might want privacy. Or maybe you want to restrict access to certain players in your game. The Guild of Mages, they get access to the magic stuff, but they don't know about the other stuff, and so you can control all that sort of thing. Or maybe you have patrons on some site like Patreon, and you want to be able to give them the advantages of generously being your patron by getting access to your stuff. So again, privacy settings will be something you'll be after. And you can, if you are a guild member, you can invite in co-authors and other people to contribute to your world, and so it just builds up and up. And you can join a community, yes, a community of over 200,000 World Anvilers who are also working on their worlds, and you can perhaps consult them with questions you might have and offer them advice, and just generally team up and make the world just that little bit better. So if you reckon that this is for you, why don't you go to www.worldanvil.com and find out. It's online, it's available, it's largely free, and good lord, it's British! So go to World Anvil today! Or tomorrow. I mean, no immediate rush. Right, back to making models. Now, to texture all my castle and dungeon scenery, I'm using these rolling pins. I got them from a company called Green Stuff World, and I'm using just two at the moment. There's one for the floors, which is called Flagstones, and that's this one, and that gives you this sort of texture, which is perfectly authentic. That's a flagstone pattern that I've seen at a number of archaeological sites, so that's fine by me. And the other one, which I use for the uprights, so the walls. So this gives you this effect, and you can see here I've made little laboratory. Laboratory. I always get those confused. Anyway, here we are. It's a loo, and you can see this has spaces for two, and here are the stones that make up the walls. Now I say stones, but what is this rolling pin called? It's called small bricks. Bricks? How are these bricks? These are quite clearly not bricks. These are quite clearly stones. These are largely worked ashlars. These are not bricks. Bricks are made up of clay and fired in a kiln, and they're usually reddish and orange and all exactly the same size. They are created by man. They're moulded into the desired shape, whereas stones come out of the quarry sometimes a little bit random, and so you have to fit them together like this. These are quite clearly stones, not bricks. But anyway, apart from that linguistic error, I'm reasonably happy with them, and I suppose I should show you them in action. Now here I have a biggish bit of the foam stock that I'm using for making this stuff out of. And something I want to draw your attention to is that the outside of it is dark and rough and slightly textured. You see it's got a slight ripple to it in places, whereas the inside, the cross-section that is exposed by cutting, is much smoother and slightly paler. And here's the thing, it takes texture a lot better. So you've cut a bit, and it's got an exposed side and the dark rough side, and you use your rolling pin to try to put texture on that side, and that works fine. You turn over and my goodness, you may have a lot of trouble putting texture on this. It's got a sort of like an outer crust on it, which is a little bit harder. So one thing you can do is use your hot wire cutter to cut a very, very thin layer off the surface. Now, if you don't have a hot wire cutter, this option really isn't available to you. And even with a hot wire cutter, it's a bit of a faff, and is a bit of a risk as well to the wire on your cutter, which is vulnerable to snapping. It's an annoyance, but sometimes it is necessary to think about removing this surface. Now here is an offcut of the foam, which I'm going to use to demonstrate just how well and quickly these rolling pins can work. Fingers crossed. Now they do sell these rubbery rings to act as guides. You're supposed to stick them on like that, either end, and this is meant to keep you straight as you roll. I have found these to be completely unnecessary. And so I wouldn't particularly recommend them. Although, if you are using them in their other purpose, then perhaps they have a good use, which is that if instead of foam you're using some sort of clay, some putty, and you want that putty to end up the exactly even thickness, then this will give you that thickness, and the rings come in a few different sizes for that purpose. Right, now then, this is the exposed side. And I put it at one end and I go pressing down quite hard. There you go. It is that quick. And I think you'll agree that is a pretty decent bit of texture. Now, if I flip it over, this is the outer crusty side of the foam, and it makes a different noise. I'm having to push much, much harder. And actually I sort of got away with it. It's not as good, but sometimes it doesn't do anything like as well as that. So frankly, that hasn't illustrated my point terribly well, because that's worked reasonably well. I mean, not brilliantly, but usably well. And it looks better as well. It looks better because this is darker, the contrast is higher, so the texture looks better than on this side. But when you come to paint it, you'll find that this paints up a lot better than this. This detail is much more shallow and vague. Now these very tall pillars illustrate the point quite well. You may notice that on this surface here, those are the marks left by the rolling pin, as are those on the opposite side. But the other two sides I've had to texture laboriously with a biro that had run out of ink, pushing it in to make an indentation, because this side and its opposite were the outer sides of the material. So this pillar used the full thickness of the material. There's the stock foam that I was working with, and although the exposed inner sides took the texture from the rolling pin very well, the outer one really didn't, and so that was necessary in both these cases. And these also illustrate quite potently the value of putting weights in the bottom of these things, because without weights these would be almost unusable. A breath of air would knock them over. As it is, they stand up very stably indeed, with the weight at the bottom of them. And why are they so tall? Well, I just thought that, you know, sometimes you might want to stick one into a room in order to indicate that there's a very high ceiling in this room, albeit one that's completely at odds with the proportions of this particular example room. But in a larger room, this wouldn't look so ridiculous. I hope you'll agree. It definitely would be an inconvenience in the convenience. I tried a few different paint schemes. One was to take the original foam, which is this mid-grey, and then paint it with a sort of moist brushing technique. So you just pick up the raised areas, and I've painted that in brown because very little stone in the real world is actually a pure neutral grey. I then dry brushed it white, and then over the top of the dry brushed white, and you can see some of the brown is still showing through, but you know, not a huge amount, so it's still fairly neutral grey. And then over the top of that, I have varnished with, I've just used this Ron seal, which in Britain is available. It's not specialist modelling varnish at all. It said it's available in all sorts of painter and decorator stuff. It's just for varnishing wooden, well, anything, furniture, skirting boards, whatever. And into that I put some black ink. I'm sure there are many brands available. I just bought this one because it's what my local art shop just happened to have. It wasn't brilliantly cheap, but it'll go a very long way. And then mixing that into the varnish, I find that the varnish holds it in the crevices. I've tried all sorts of washes, but my experience with washes is that they look great when they're wet, but then as they dry, the pigment migrates to the highlands and the effect is lost. Anyway, I think I think I'm reasonably happy with that, and it's reasonably quick and easy. Here's another paint scheme which I'm less keen on, to be honest. This one involved using a sponge. You see, I ripped this from a larger sponge which had holes in it already, and that was to get a rough surface. And then I dipped this in a couple of different contrasting colours of paint. One was a sort of a reddish one, and the other one was a yellowy beige. And I then sponged on to the surface, and then I dry brushed over the top and used my varnish with the ink mixed in, and I'm not so happy with this. It looks a bit sort of bruised. It's a bit strange. The sponging is a little bit random, doesn't coordinate with the location of the stones at all, and I don't know, it's quick, I suppose, and from a distance it looks all right, but I wasn't that wild about it. Now, another technique was to do what I did here and paint individual stones, taking a bit of care. You see, some I painted greenish and some a reddish colour, and that I think looks reasonably good. You may think when you first paint on the greens and the reds and the other colours that they look ridiculously out of place, too contrasting, but once you've dry brushed with a very pale colour over the top and then put on your black wash, glaze, whatever you're going to use, they don't look too bad. So that is another technique. The snag with this one, of course, being that you have to bother to put the effort in to paint reasonably carefully, so it takes longer. This loo, by the way, is the smaller of the two that I've made so far. I've made a larger one, which I haven't finished painting yet, and as you can see, it has spaces for 6 people to enjoy having a poo and playing cribbage together, or whatever it is that these people do. One imagines that if you're going to live underground, yes, underground, you really want to have good loos, because can you imagine the stink if somebody just, you know, went in the corner underground? They would be very unpopular for a very long time. So this one, as you can see, has got walls all the way around, and this one I was thinking more of an ensuite design, so I've left one of the walls absent, so that when you get another room with a door like that, you can just put the two together, and there you go. It's an ensuite loo for 2. A little mini rant now. I am perplexed and appalled by this fashion for ever increasingly vast bases. Why is it necessary to have figures on such enormous bases? Look, these are 1-inch squares. He doesn't even fit. He doesn't even fit on an inch square. He's only an inch tall, for goodness sake. Why does he need a base so ridiculously vast? Now, in the good old days, before slaughter bases and before the dark times in the Empire, figures came with the base moulded on. The figure and the base were one. Inseparable and strong and good and simple, and the bases were just big enough for the figure to stand up. He stands up absolutely fine on that, and look, he fits in the square, and you can even get a couple of his friends in. And Then if you want him to stand on the table or go up some stairs, stand on the platform, whatever, these are so much more versatile. Now, I can understand that for tabletop war games where you might need standardized army spacing, there may be an excuse for large bases, or at least larger bases. But for role-play gaming, no, small bases are good. Plus, the fashion for large bases has tempted a lot of people to make the bases ever more ostentatious, and they walk around with rocks and loads of foliage and bushes and bits of wrecked building and all sorts on the base, and it's quite distracting, and they look quite ridiculous in almost any context. But certainly if they step out onto a stone platform like this, the fact that they've got half a forest on their base makes them look just ridiculous. Now, I'm deliberately making my dungeon scenery to be compatible with a lot of commercially available dungeon scenery these days, and the standard seems to have been arrived at. There are loads of companies all using the same set of standard measurements, some of them for people with 3D printers, and they just sell the plans, and others are actually selling the things themselves. So, these walls are 2 inches tall, but the floor is ½ an inch thick, so the amount of standing wall is 1.5 inches. Which is quite a low ceiling, but you do of course need to be able to see into these rooms and be able to manipulate figures within them. So if, for example, you do have a bit of a cramped room like this, and the players are looking at it at this sort of angle on the table, you can see that the figures can disappear in there. So I decided that when I made 5-foot wide corridors like this, that what I would do is I would make the walls slightly shorter. So these walls stick up only 1 inch above the floor, so that when your little figure, that little dwarf, you see, you put him in there, and you see he still disappears almost, but you can just about see him. You see, that's the head of the dwarf. He's in there. You've got to trust me. He's in there. One problem that cropped up after I'd been making a few of these 5-foot wide corridors is that the tiniest inaccuracies start to show up. You see, this is just 3 pieces. It's this wall, and the floor. And I would cut them exactly to length, glue them together, put a bit of glue on, stick some pins in to hold them whilst they were drying, and then all seemed fine. But then when you match one up against another, you see that they're not perfectly accurate. You see, that's not a perfect right angle. That's more like a right angle. That's skew-if. That's more like a right angle. That's skew-if. And you can see a bit of daylight, can't you, through the crack. Of course, that won't matter when this is set down on the table, but it does show you the inaccuracy. So a new policy is to make all these walls and floors slightly too long, texture them on the sides and tops but not on the ends, and then when they're glued together and the glue is dry, then cut them to length exactly, so they should then be more accurate. Right, now to cut these corridor bits so that they're at 45 degrees and all these bits are in a nice straight line, and for this purpose I have set this bar thingy-bob at 45 degrees, and I'm just going to slide it up that way, and to get it clear of the wire. I'm just going to make sure that we're in tune. La, la, la. Yep, that's pretty good. Okay, so I now turn it on. It makes a slight humming noise, and I now line this up on the black line here where it does its cutting. So I think about there, looks good, and then holding it against the bar here, I then slide it along and hope this works. There we go. So now we've got one continuous, accurate, I hope, line there. And now to do the other end. Oh, I'm going to have to adjust this to be the other way around. So in that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same end of all the corridors at once, and then I'll adjust it. Oops. Right, there you go. Okay, 45 degree corridor. Good. Grand, and now they're pretty accurate. You see, I put them together this way, and that's a straight line, and that's a right angle. And now I can do diagonal joins between rooms, possibly. I mean, how useful this will ever be, I don't know, but I can, at least in theory, do something like that, which is presumably in some way good. You see, I think this is overkill as a base for a figure. Now, another thing I've made is a modular system of stairways, and I've based this on just a couple of standard measurements. They've all got the same thickness. It's an arbitrary one which was based entirely on the thickness of the pieces of foam that I was using to create them. And there are two standard heights, the high height and the low height. And then after that, you're away. So I've got these pieces which go from the ground up to the low height. And I've got these pieces which start one step height higher. Can you see that? One step height higher than the low. They go up to the higher one. And you can put these together in all manner of combinations. I've also got blocks which are just, they don't have no stairs, but they allow you to extend in all sorts of different ways. And I've also got these bits. Now these bits I got for free because every time you make one of these, you cut away one of those. Boom. So every time you make one of those, you get one of these for free. And these can be added from the ground going up like that. And they can also be added like that. Loads and loads of uses, including if you've got this, which is just a flight of stairs that goes all the way up to the high height, like that. You see, if you've got a figure who is running along and he ends up at the end of his turn, or perhaps he wants to end up for some reason halfway up a flight of stairs, you can make a base for him like that and just stand him on it. You see, and the figure will now stand happily on a flight of stone steps in the middle of it. So there you go. Hours and hours of fun. I've also noticed I made a plinth here. Possibly it would have been more useful if I hadn't put that very small bit on the top of it. I might remove that. And I made double width stairs. Guess how I did that? Yeah, that's right. Two single width ones glued together. I got a bit fancy with this one and added a door underneath on both sides actually, but I imagine that this would be up against a wall on the inside of some dungeon, so you wouldn't see that it doesn't go anywhere, and so that would become the door into the next room. And yeah, that's enough of that. Next up is one of these. What is that? It's a curious thing. These now have a name. These are called dungeon stackers. Yes, that's what the online community, oh yes, that's right, it's a community now of crafting DMs calling these, and they're really all the rage. This is my own particular design. The standard design looks much plainer, looks just like that. And they're supposed to be usable as staircases, but I find that if you've got a fella who's only that tall, then you might just have a bit of trouble, you know, in his armour when he's being shot at and in a bit of a hurry, but carrying lots of gold that he's just looted, you know, he might have a terrible time getting over those. I don't think anyone would build a staircase with stairs that are 2.5 feet tall. So I have carved a step into each level, and so it looks far more believable that he might make his way up there. And if his base isn't ridiculously enormous, he should have no trouble at all standing on that. So why are they called stackers? Well, what you're supposed to do is stack them, you see, and then you produce blocks, and then you can have bits go up to the blocks. You can also have blocks at different heights. So for instance, you could put a couple of those together like that, and then you've got some stairs that are like that, you see, and then you can have some that come in from this side as well, and or you could have some come to a platform like that, and then it's linked like that because that is in some way, I'm sure, good. And then you can have a way heading off in that direction, and more adventure. You see, oh, adventure, you see, and he's off to adventure. Now, there is a drawback, I dare say you've spotted it already, with my design, which is that if you do that, you've got you've got a hole there left over. One thing you can do is just don't do that, or you could use one of the ones which doesn't have that, because I did a few extra ones afterwards thinking, yeah, all right, maybe it would be easier, so that that doesn't leave the gap. Or you could just throw a rug over it, or just say, never mind, it's a damaged bit, it needs repair. And if you go the other way and you put them on that way, you see, there you go, it's hidden. The trouble is you've now got that bit. But of course that hole there is very likely to be hidden by the next thing that you put there to hide it. Now these are 2 stages. 2 inches by 2 inches by whatever thickness is convenient. I suppose half an inch would be the standard. So that's a 2 by 1 on top of a 2 by 2 square, and that's a 2 by 1 on a 2 by 2 on a 2 by 3. I would recommend that you make at least twice as many of these 3-parters as you do of the 2-parters, and they go together in all sorts of combinations, hours of fun. Will I ever use them? I don't know. I don't know. Will I ever use any of this stuff? I don't know, but I'm enjoying making it. And there have some more slightly bonkers designs here. This one, as you see, goes up into the corner like that, and this is the opposite. And of course these can be put together in various bonkers ways. There you go. Look, you've got your little amphitheatre there. You see, so that people can view what's going on down here, and then they can make their way out of the exit, which is that way, or maybe that's another way how they got up there in the first place. It's just hours and hours of fun, so many combinations, and if you really want, of course, since these are negatives of each other, they do go together like that. And yes, I know there's a little gap at the bottom like that, but you put a thing in front of it, and then you're fine.